Okay, so let me then go straight to the presentation. I'll share the screen. Okay, so I called it Consensus AI because there's a difference between the version that I showed you several years ago and what it is now. And I decided to launch a separate website, which is obviously part of Sustensis. So I opened with discussing the need for consensual debating, why we need this. And imagine that you are a politician or a decision maker, and you need to make decisions fast and ideally to reach a broader consensus. So how can you do this fast and achieve a consensus at the same time? We have to understand, and obviously we've been debating it many times, that we live in a global village. And whether this is your country, your company, you will not be insulated from a global turmoil. Just today, we had literally global turmoil in Syria and Turkey, and I'm very sorry for what has been happening. But I'm talking about a political or social upheavals somewhere away from thousands of miles away, which may impact your decisions. Now, many issues are very complex and takes years to achieve a consensus. And we have, for instance, not just ULEZ, but think about HS2. What a ridiculous project it is. And people still maintain that it's going to be right in 20 years' time, to be going on a train with the speed of the last century, right? We take it seriously that there is a kind of technological and political consensus that you should go ahead. It's a complex decision. It shouldn't be take so long. It should be done in a different way. But we have to accept that issues are very complex, and normally they take years to achieve. So we have to also consider that we no longer have a comfort to debate such issues over decades, or say even years. We live at the time of exponential pace of change. So that sheer pace of change may impact your decisions. How? Simply, what you are trying to do may be obsolete before your decision is implemented. And HS2 is a crystal clear example of how absurd it is to go ahead with implementing something in 20 years' time, mind you. This is how we cannot cope with the exponential pace of change. And yet, very complex decisions like referenda, like a Brexit, were taken or decided by referenda. Let's just remind ourselves how it was. The referendum was held in June 2016, and such a complex issue, which is comparable to a constitution, was decided by a referendum on the yes or no vote over a very short time of debating. So there was just one question: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? So the one option was remain a member of the European Union, and 48% of the people said yes, and leave the European Union, 52% said yes, and that's why we left. Now, such a referendum, if it were to be called at all, should, in my view, have a voting period of several months, with revoting allowed, and offer several options, like with single transferable votes. I give you an idea what it might be. So the options might be remain a member of the European Union, leave with no European Court of Justice jurisdiction, very hard Brexit. That's what we currently have. Leave, but remain the member of the single market and the customs union. Leave with the single market only. Leave with the customs union only. And leave on the Norwegian model basis. And if you apply the single transferable vote, it would mean that if you prefer to remain in the European Union and this wasn't really going through, then you may say, my second option is to leave the single market, but stay in single market and customs union. And the third one might be single market and so on. So this is how single transferable vote counts. I won't go into the detail. Anyway, that is not what happened. So I just cancel the code. So we need something better. And you probably have heard about citizens' assemblies. Yes, they could be applied. Just very briefly how they work. So there are randomly selected citizens, ideally from the electoral roll. So they work on a similar principle like a jury service. There are from 50 to 300 people. The largest one and one of the longest was held last year from 2021 to 2022. And that was obviously our press only mentioned it on one day that something like that happened. That was the Conference on the Future of Europe, where 108 citizens from 27 countries were selected to debate the future of Europe. And this is going ahead, by the way, but this is a separate subject. So if you are to be a member of Citizens' Assembly, you go through 3 stages. First of all, you learn with expert and through self-study. So you need some material before you start voting. And then there is a deliberation. Then you voted the first time, and you can confront your own views with the experience of others. And then there's a decision-making process where minority views are usually heard and recorded, but this is a little bit chaotic, to say the least. And the duration depends on complexity, from a few weeks to a year, like that Conference on the Future of Europe. For such a citizens' assembly to have real impact, they should be binding. And quite often they are only advisory, not like in the case of the Conference on the Future of Europe and on the Irish referendum, which changed the Irish constitution dramatically. That was one of the most successful and impactful citizens' assembly ever. But how citizen assemblies debate complex issues. You may have seen the so-called focus groups organized by some newspapers or some broadcasting organizations like BBC or ITV. So they have perhaps 30, 40 people gathered in a room, selected randomly, and they put their emotions, their observations on yellow stickers on a whiteboard. So this is the initial starting point. And then after a while, people have their own suggestion. Yeah, I would vote for this, but I would like to change something. And these are the green green stickers. So you form some groups of agreement. This is a very tedious process, and it's quite chaotic, very slow, can only be done in a physical location, in a room, and it's limited only to tens of people. So we must have something better. And that's the idea I had about 6-7 years ago, first time. It wasn't called consensual debating at that time, but I'm summarizing now where we are now. What I have developed is a merger of 3 ideas. The first one may surprise you. It's called spiral dynamics. Have you heard about Nelson Mandela and de Klerk, how they were debating for 3 years the new Africa? That's South Africa. That's what were they using. And they were helped by one man called Don Beck. I actually met him in 2001 in London at the 3-day conference, which was called Be the Change. And he was presenting and talking about his intermediary service between Mandela and de Klerk, how he had to convince mainly de Klerk that he changes his stubborn view on where Africa should be going, South Africa going forward. So he used a very complex method, initially developed by an American psychologist in the 80s, and I won't go into the details. So, but it has some very powerful means to achieve consensus. I summarize it. It comes from the understanding that nothing is static. Everything is changing and evolving. Yes, there was a guy called Heraclitus from Ephesus in ancient Greece who said, Pantare, everything flows. So that's the time and change. So it comes from that, the point of departure. And it says that as we adapt, our personal values may change. And they do change as we are all almost retired. I'm not sure whether anybody from today's participants is not retired. We are all retired. And our values have changed since the time we were young. But extreme opposite views cannot be changed overnight. Think that you want to convince a hard Brexiteer that it was an error. It would take you years. So how do you do that? Complex problems need to be split into small pieces, and they require time, unfortunately. So what you do, or what they did in South Africa, Mandela and de Klerk, first of all, listed what they agreed. And they added to that list more and more items until the hardest problems were left at the end. And they took most of the time because de Klerk had to convince his own party. And that was the biggest problem. He was already convinced, but he had to bring his party to accept the deal. So that's the basis of spiral dynamics, which have been incorporated into the consensual debating more or less like that. But this is a very complex method. I stay away from. It is even more complex than what I said here. It takes a lot of time and is appropriate for one-to-one debates. So what we did, we I merged the American multi-voting system called POLIS, which was first applied in 2012 in Taiwan. I won't go into the details, but what it does is that allows the participants to vote many times. They are brought statistically into 3 groups. The agree group, say B, the disagree, A, and don't knows and don't care, say C. And the whole idea is that you not only get a consensus, but you get a majority of 60%. Because from the very start, the assumption was that the minority views have also to be represented in the majority. So that's not why it's not 50-50, but 60-40 at least. The problem, the good idea is that you can involve tens of thousands of people and they can vote remotely. But conducting such a debate is very long. It requires, first of all, it requires a lot of preparation time. So that's what I changed over the years, and in the last month, with the help of AI, I followed this spiral dynamics idea to break complex problem into a one-line statements. So the assumption is that the agreement is achieved gradually. It can be used for tens of thousands of people voting remotely, facilitates with AI very fast preparation. Instead of months, you can do it in a day or two. I did everything in 1.5 days for ULEZ, right? This is how I'll show you how it actually does it. Participants do not deliberate or discuss it directly with each other. It's an indirect discussion or conversation via statements, not with persons. Voting is anonymous, so nobody knows who voted how. Even if I had access to this, I don't know who voted what. And that is a crucial, important point. And revoting is possible, unlike, for instance, in focus groups. And participants can supplement the original statement with their own. So they say, all right, I agree with the major motion, but I would like to tinker with it a bit. I would like to add this and that. And he comes up with his own statement. And since this is a revoting process, next time in the next round, his statement comes as one of the possible options. So everybody votes on his statement as well. This is displayed as a live graphics showing how participants' views change. I will show you in a minute. So there are several rounds of voting until there is a group with 60% majority. The actual time to making decision can be cut from months to days. You could do it in a day, but it depends upon the complexity of the issues. Normally, what I would recommend is that you start a debate in a day, and since people can vote remotely, you set a time. Say, we come back in a month's time, and by that time, people may have voted many times over. By the time, by the end of the month, we summarize it and have hopefully a majority view. So consensual debating can be applied in several areas. Citizens' assembly, as I mentioned, in a citizen senate, which may be now part of the European Union, because this is the very latest news. There is almost a certainty after the meeting between Macron and Scholz that the European constitutions will be changed. So that will impact us directly as well, because suddenly we may find that there aren't so many differences between what we wanted, what David Cameron wanted, and what would be available, like, for instance, migration. Migration will be debated this Thursday in the European Union in a big way. So things are moving on the other side of the channel as well. But this is a separate thing. Referenda held over a few months with a possibility of revoting. You can even think about the referenda on millions of people debating in this similar way with revoting, which would be the most democratic thing you can think of. It is all possible because we have such facilities now. We shouldn't be thinking with our head being designed in the last century, right? This is let's make progress. Local council can use it, social and cultural organization, and science and technology as well. So how consensual debating helps achieve 60% majority? This is just last one slide. So how do you prepare, and how I prepared that debate on ULEZ as an example? So first of all, you would agree the motion of the debate with the sponsor. So I took the motion from the Sadiq Khan's motion that ULEZ needs to be expanded to the entire London, outer London. So that was the motion. Then I gathered all the relevant digital documentation for AI debater and the participants. So what happened? I have accumulated dozens of documents from the official sites, and I let AI to read those documents, which took a few seconds, and then come up with a one-page summary, which is on the website, which it took another few seconds, say 10 seconds, right? You get a summary, which normally would take perhaps half a day or a day, it depends. Then I ask it to produce 5 objectives. Believe it or not, in the original documents, those objectives are not clear at all. I mean, even the original document suffers from such a deficiency, right? That you don't know why really they want to, it's all over the place. It should be very focused and very clear. So AI did it for me. Again, in a matter of, say, within a minute, right? I had those 5 and I said, make it 5 key objectives, not 20 objects, just 5, and made 5. And then I said, create for each of those objectives, create a short description. So what it really means, what it wants to achieve. And that is an example, what it has done. And then I asked it for each such objective to produce 10 one-line statements and produce all those statements for all those 51 objectives they are altogether. And then I combined in the alphabetic order, so there is no bias, and created first and created conversation for the Polish debating system, that American system, which needs that. So that was done as well, and that was it. So that's the end of my presentation. I don't want to go any further, but instead I will go into the website itself. Now, before I go, do you have any questions?
I do, Tony, but I'd like to get all the way through, really. So,
okay. So let me then go straight to the presentation. So to the website. I share the screen. Right. So this is the website. Has anybody been there, done anything?
No, I tried.
You tried.
I looked at it.
I know that Bruce has. David, you have?
I've looked at this, yes.
Yes. Okay. So I won't bother you with details, but anyway, this is the homepage, which explains what happened, and this is the part of substances and blah blah blah. And then I have a tab on consensual debating, explaining. This is an overview what it is generally, and it has subtabs which goes into more details that it can be used for all levels of governance, business, any area, not just politics. Then I explain how it works. And when you click on this picture, you get a one-page summary, like here, which explains you what it does, how, for instance, the ULEZ project was created, as an example. So that's this one. Then how to vote. So here are the instructions on how you vote and what happens and what you can see as you vote. What the final report looks like. if you click on this, you have the whole PDF. It opens here. So this is explaining the whole report, the whole voting. And then the final thing is for you to try. So I explained what, if you want to try it on your, or anybody that comes on the website doesn't have to, at the moment, doesn't have to register, but I have the registration in place, because if there are some nutters, you know, coming to the website, that they could spoil it. So I introduced the registration as a must. So for instance, people won't see it, what's there. Like for instance, here, if you click on this one, it is password protected, so you can't vote until you know the password. The same is for each of those these are projects prepared for it, and one of these projects that I'm thinking of will be voting on Brexit. I want to make a Brexit tab, so one of these will be on Brexit. But in order to try the consensus debating, I chose the London outer law emission zone as an example. So first of all, what I did, I gathered the official case. So this is the source document, if you like. This is the summary, but it's not the AI summary. This is done. This is from the London Transport. This is an official document, right? So you can read this official document if you want. But if you don't want, then you can go to another document that tells you how the decision was made. And as you read the papers, you know how controversial the decision is because of the way in which it had been made, which is quite right. So you can have this as well. And then I provide for those who are not bothered with reading too much. So this is the whole summary, which was created by ChatGPT. And then I go into this is the structure that each project has. So first of all, it has those tabs on official documentation, and then the summary by AI, and then info, structured info on the subject. Like this is just a summary of that subject information. But then you have to click on the side tabs, which introduce you to elements of the main decisions, like the main argument for that ULEZ was improve air quality. So if you click on it, it explains what it is. If you click on, say, optimize car use, then it explains what it is, and so on and so on. And then you have the second big tab, which is debate itself. So this introduces you to the debate.
Tony, can I just interrupt a second?
Yes.
The earlier version I saw, the bit prior to this slide was on info.
Yes.
I took the note as being describing the problem and getting more detail.
Yes.
The next bit was called polis. So
Yes.
I'm now saying you're now using debate instead of polis.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was on the sidelines. It was changed because the original one that had two side tabs. I've got rid of those tabs because it took too much space, and on a mobile phone, you got a restricted view. So I wanted, this is just usability.
Okay.
So in the debate, if you click on optimize car use, you have the 10 statements on which you will be voting. You have a brief description and 10 statements on which you will be voting, like optimize car use. And what you have a statement like banning cars in outer London would affect more negatively the people living in rural areas because of poor transport. And if I take this example, you can see that so far there are 24 participants who voted at least once. They may have voted, so the numbers are not the votes, they are participants. So there are 10 participants in group B who voted on that statement. And if I click on that statement, it shows me what is the majority of the opinion. The majority of opinion is the group B. It says, and they agree that it would encourage the use of more sustainable transportation options such as walking, cycling, and public transportation. Right? 67% of the people who voted voted on this statement. Then there is group A, which has the majority. Group A, banning car use in ULEZ would help London reach its goal of achieving net zero carbon emission by 2030. It's got 80% of votes. And group C are those who don't know. So what happens when you are here, and I use this as an example, and look carefully what happens. This is me. Okay, assuming this blue circle. Do you see that blue circle?
Yeah.
Right? This is me. When I click agree, look what happens. So I stop. I want to have this. Yeah. You see, I'm moving on this. Banning the older cars used in outer London may drastically negative, maybe having drastically negatively affecting older people or people on lower income. I said I agree, and I moved from the center towards the group of either don't know or unsure, right? So if I click on the next statement, banning car use in London would greatly reduce air pollution, and the proof I'm also in that group. And I can click limiting car use in London can negatively impact people of poor background. I don't know. So I'm in the I don't know group. If I click now here, I will disagree. I'll be moving to a different group. You see, and so on. And I'm just clicking in order to arrive here. And when I arrive at you voted on all statements, it shows me what is the current position after all my votings, where I am. I am in the middle of nowhere, somewhere on the edges of group A. And group A has a statement banning cars in outer London would affect more negatively people living in rural areas because of poor public transport. 100% of people in that group agree with that. And so it goes. I can now choose my email and click subscribe. So I will get a message that I voted on this particular statement. But I don't have to. You don't have to vote. And if I press F5, I refresh the screen, which I don't reveal to anybody because it's a little bit of not cheating, but it's accelerating the voting. Then I can vote again. If I click, I can now go into, if I click on this, on Polis, and I sign in, then I will have, because I'm administrator, so I have access to all the conversations. So I can go to that vote number 3, optimize car use, right? And I can say, produce me the current report. I click on this, and this took just a second. And you have a full report saying that 33 people voted so far, 25 people grouped, 187 votes were cast, and so on and so on, and how divisive the statement was. The majority is somewhere in the middle. And then what is the majority? On which, so the 60% majority. So on which statements of those 10 got 60% agreement? It would significantly reduce greenhouse gas emission. That got 55%, sorry, group C, 100%, group B, 55%. It would encourage the use of more sustainable transport options such as walking and so on. Group A was the most, the majority, and they disagreed. The red line means that they disagreed with it. So majority doesn't mean agreement. Majority means what is at least 60% of the people that agree with a given statement. And that given statement may be against the main motion. And that's how it goes. And you have all the statistics here, but then at the very end, you can see the graphs that I shown you before, how the people voted, and all the statements, how all the statements were voted on from 0 to 9, so 10 statements. So that is basically it. I can only tell you that I also have another project that I've initiated, but this is a kind of a live project. And here you will have to, you would have to log on. And this is about digital identity. And it shows the, you know that digital identity is going on, yeah? That you've got till 6th of March to contribute to any, if you disagree or agree, you can actually participate in that. And this covers another subject, but this time there is only one statement, which is this one. Digital identities need to be introduced to easily and quickly verify a person, reducing time and effort compared to physical documents. That's the government motion. That's the original government motion, and you can agree on it or not. I've left it like that. Just don't want to spoil it. Where are we? I can show you what's the current voting. Wow, all over the place. Because most of the voting, just for your information, this is my testing the system, if you like. So there are some people, real people, but most of it is me. Like I done a minute ago when I showed you how to vote. Yeah, so I can easily retrieve those votes and say that they are rejected, and then everything will be empty, and people can start real voting. Okay, I shut up, and it's over to you.
Very impressive.
Very impressive.
Yeah, well done. Actually, you've moved that along a long way. You've been busy. Tony, I'll happily sort of throw in my thoughts at top level. I can see where you've moved. I get it. And when we talked probably 2 years ago, more around polis and the European debate, I could see that you were having other things going on. So clearly, that's now revealed itself as to what that was. I made some notes, not because I'm kind of rational and orderly, but there are a number of things that say the complexity of this needs to be weaved through more easily in order for engagement of the relevant parties to participate in order to be relevant. The next thing then is the sustainability of that. How does that audience, I know it doesn't necessarily need, but the degrees of freedom and constraints kind of principle on this become interesting. Purpose. We talked of initiating a process ULEZ for a sponsor. So the platform becomes observed by people like me as saying, well, what's its purpose? Well, your purpose I know, but if I didn't know you, I wouldn't know that. And then you've got a bit of a triangle of, you've got an issue, you've got a sponsor, and you've got a platform for a purpose that might not be common between those three parties. So none of that undermines anything about what you've achieved at all. It just says those difficulties. Clearly, there's things like voting, you know, multiple voting and delinquency of some kind, which doesn't want to affect the data. And then finally, the outcome, you know, the decision, as you call it, that needs to have an overview explanation somehow for those interested parties that really want to question that the outcome was right. So there is the graphical representation of it, so you're engaged. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of data there. And I'm afraid somebody like me needs not to have that in front of me, except if I need it. I need to sweep through in this process for it to become engaging enough for somebody like me to do enough of. Given that the subjects, the sponsor, the platform might have multiple things going on here, clearly all at one time. You've got this, as I call it, it's a non-equilibrium dynamic decision making. It's never in equilibrium. It's constantly, as you said, evolving and changing. So when does it end? So there's a lot of this really looks like a capability to address all of that. I agree. But there'll be a lot of data collecting to know how well it's doing it.
Okay.
That's me.
I'll try to answer all those 4 questions, starting with complexity. What I have revealed to you, or what I discussed with you today, would not normally be for Joe Blogs, right? It will be streamlined and adjusted to a particular audience. That's the first thing. If there is an official project, if you like, and it is being done with people being assembled in a room or even in a Zoom session, then there will be a facilitator like myself, which will guide step by step what they need to do. Even say within 15 minutes, explaining the basics as I've done, and then trying one statement to get them the feeling, what it is about, and then answering the questions, what is happening and so on, because in principle, it's very easy. Agree, disagree, or I'm not sure. It's as simple as that. The thing is that people may have difficulties to see the totality of it, and you're absolutely right. What happens next? And when I said that you can add your own statement, like for instance, I may add, I really do not want the ULEZ scheme to be implemented at all, right? I submit this, and that statement will be seen by anybody. So I will have to explain how it works bit by bit. So if it is facilitated, then the problem of complexity hopefully will disappear somehow, because people will try it and after a while they'll know. It's like you use a smartphone, you got the new apps and you have to learn a bit. But I don't see such a big problem with that if it is facilitated. If it is not facilitated, like for instance, somebody comes from the wild onto the website and then tries to play with it, and unless he has read all the introduction, because the introductions should give him all the information how to do that, assuming that he's smart enough, and that may be a big assumption. So that's how I would deal with complexity. Sustainability, you mentioned. I don't know exactly what you mean, Stephen, by that.
I meant in the duration of the proposal, the subject, ULEZ, sustaining it until it's concluded.
Yes, okay. So that depends a lot upon the sponsor, whether this is a monitored, facilitate a debate. So it would normally come to an end, and then the conclusion, the 60% majority at least, vote will be provided to the sponsor saying this is what the people want. But they don't want ULS at all, or they want this to be modified to this.
I think it was in the context of sustainability of the audience over the lifetime of the decision-making process. So yes. One of the things I wrote down was scales.
Yes, yes.
There are scales in all aspects: time, relevance,
yes.
Complex, and you're jumping across them from a grand principle of ULEZ, yes or no, through the whole machinery of decision making. That's, if the more you've got, the harder the sustainability of that breadth of audience. So I suppose the scales audience that you're dealing with on a big issue.
Do you mean that the people will just disappear and it will have?
Well, inevitably, yeah. But more the point, the question at the top level is one thing. The question at the deep root level is lots of issues, questions, statements, blah, blah, blah. And the dynamics of that either have a lot of people all the time, or they have a variable amount of people all the time coming and going. But progressively, the consensual debating takes that audience somewhere that gets concluded by the sponsor, but that audience could be in all states of disrepair at any stage during that process. And it's that sustainability.
Yes.
Yeah, do you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the problem of citizens' assemblies, whether they use consensual debating or polls. It is a problem that people disappear because this is not mandatory. It's normally voluntary, even if, like in Irish referendum, they selected the people from the electoral lists, and they were kind of not forced to. That was not that clear. Anyway, there were initially 99 delegates. Towards the end, there were about 65, 68. I don't remember exactly, because it was lasting a whole year. 52 weekends. 2 days each time. So 104 days. Yeah, it's quite a lot. So the answer is that normally you would take 2 or 3 times more people than normally would be needed, assuming that some will get bored. But still, you have a representative sample. Regarding the controlling the whole process, you need a facilitator. There is no other way. It won't go on its own, right? It has to be facilitated. The outcome, it depends. If such a process is binding, so if, for instance, within this environment, those who voted would have voted against the ULEZ, then the Decan would have to simply abandon the scheme. which, by the way, I am for. Going through all the pros and cons, on average, I'm for the scheme. Now, how to apply it? If it is not binding, then obviously it's only advisory. And I just wanted to remind you that it would work more or less, the effect would be more or less similar as to the petition system. You probably know that we have a petition system since 2015, and that was thanks to the coalition. It's the liberals that forced the government to introduce the petition system. And since that time, over 50,000 petitions have been launched to ask or force the parliament to debate the issue, the petition. And guess what? Out of 50,000, only one petition became the Act of Parliament. Do you know what it was? The Act on VAT on tampons.
Oh.
Such a trivial matter. The most important, which got 4.5 million votes to have another referendum on Brexit, got debated, but the government said, well, you better, I don't want to use the F word, but essentially that's what they said, right? We've got the majority, that's it. So it didn't mean anything. So that's the crisis we have between the politicians and the citizens, right? Politicians cannot behave like this, but they can, right?
Yeah, no, I'm up for that.
Now, in more personal terms, not going about me, but say us, it's ostensibly consensus. But this is only for you, not for a wider distribution. I have been talking to Lord Clement Jones on applying this at the Parliament initially for the APPG committee. So this is the committee on AI. I've been a member of that committee, non-voting, of course, for several years. And we are at the moment right now. He responded several times, and I'm aiming at having a personal presentation first to him and Stephen Metcalfe, the Labour MP, who is the vice chairman of the committee, to present what it is about, and if they agree, to have a special closed session for the committee where this would be used on a controversial issue. And since the members of the parliament who are members of the committee don't have to be personally there, because they can vote from home via Zoom or via website, as we have, that can go on for, say, a week or two, or even for a month to try. And obviously, this is a big if. If this happens, and if this is relatively successful, then that could be extended to other committees, and in the end, to the parliament's floor. And imagine what impact it might have. That the MPs vote unanimously, so not under whip, on a motion or on an act. And then they vote within the party, and you compare the results. You can see the impact of it, political impact, right? It will be an earthquake when people would learn that if they were their individual MPs, which apparently they are, they represent them, not the party, they represent themselves. This is the claim that especially the conservatives say, this is the first past the post, they represent you, not the party. What a sham it would be. So it can have a potentially earthquake magnitude 7, impact if it is replied. The question is how to force politicians to debate it. And we have a pending constitution constitutional debate within the UK on the Scottish, Irish, Welsh autonomy or devolution or the federated Britain, this would be an ideal thing to move forward. So that's, but it can be applied obviously at the board level for major decisions, for science and so on. And so essentially it's robust enough to withstand any, I don't know how many thousands of voters could vote simultaneously on my platform, because I don't know what are the limits. But you know, if it is taken seriously, then my intention is to give it to the parliament as a pro bono to their people, and they install it, their version, on the parliament side, and they move from there, right? So this is just an idea.
That's that must be the loftiest ambition, to get Parliament in this. There could be, as we talked those couple of years ago on a lesser version, those other places where purpose can be more contained, and you know, achieving examples of decision making in more confined spaces, because Parliament does seem to be so Machiavellian. You wonder how it will manage to manipulate this in a way that probably not as intentionally as they wish, but to basically use it for ulterior motives as opposed to its original motive. So it's a big challenge to think Parliament could adopt it. Yet that obviously is the place it should be for all the reasons we've said. And I'm wondering how you might get there with other sources. That's all. Other projects.
You could have put it better, Stephen. I'm realist. Especially this lot of politicians, if they had a tool like this, they would almost certainly manipulate. Yeah, they would put additional questions or statements that would derail the main motion. But and if the majority is Machiavellian, and I'm afraid they are, they're obviously not a lot beneficial might have come out of it for the nation and the society. But that's the world we live in. On the opposite side, I would say that if we are squeezed and if we are under duress, which we almost are, then this could be a very good excuse for any party to say, it's, you see, this is an objective vote. It has nothing to do with the party. The parliament wants this. So you can see it both ways. Like, for instance, getting back or closer to some extent to the European Union, and not thinking about rejoining, but opening a debate like that, that would be an ideal platform, because you don't say who you are. It's anonymous, but en bloc, the parliament would have its say as anonymous MPs.
No, I'd go for that one. I don't think China would be too pleased with this technology, do you?
No. I may have mentioned that I have put my proposal for the European Union Senate to the Future of Europe conference, and it went through. I'm not saying that it is exact wording that I put it through, because there were some other proposals, but mine was the most, I would say, most mature, because I've been thinking about that for many years. Anyway, it went through. And it's one of a dozen of key, out of about 900 or so proposals there were, but there are a dozen which are really fundamental, like a constitutional assembly to discuss the new treaty, the European Union Treaty. That went through as the top one, and is most opposed by essentially majority of the European Union states. It is opposed by the governments because they don't want that, because it's almost going to significantly shrink the sovereignty of the nations, which is, in my view, absolutely necessary. Either you want to survive, or you say, okay, we wave a flag and we are singing on the aboard Titanic, right? Still independent. Each country, it doesn't apply to Britain alone. It applies to almost every country, because politicians don't have an interest. They just think about the survivor, especially if you have a career lasting 30, even 40 years. Why would you derail your career? Sorry, I'm a little bit pessimistic about that. But
well, yeah, you've obviously looked around all the dark corners and under the carpet and all these issues, and
no.
yes, it does seem a bit of an intractability baked into trying to get a consensus debate that delivers targeted change.
So I have a feeler that conference in Poland. This is the European Union regional conference of the regions. So there are delegates from all 27 countries, 1,500 delegates or so. And my presentation will be the second one, just after the keynote speech. And I wanted to purposely, in order to, it will be within the panel of digitization.
Right.
And they put this panel as the first one over 2 days, because the conference is over 2 days, because they felt that this will put the whole debate into entirely different perspective, because we live in such times where, as they didn't name AI, I named AI in my presentation, they didn't, and then they felt that perhaps my presentation should be the first, and I'll be on that panel as well. So I see what is the reaction of the people, how they think about this. All right.
So a quick question on that, Tony. Is that debate going to happen? That conference going to happen live on the internet? I mean, is there any reason why people around Europe shouldn't be able to listen to it?
It might be. I'll check.
And it should be.
I checked back, and now the debate on the future of Europe conference that was held live, and anybody could access. Right, there were tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people watching it live when it was sitting, because it had every 2-3 months there was a plenary meeting in Strasbourg of 108 randomly selected citizens, 4 citizens from each country. And there were 108 parliamentarians from the European Parliament, 108 MPs outside the European Parliament, so 4 MPs from each country. So altogether there are 435 people on that panel. And that panel debated every 2 or 3 months, several times over the year. And there was a platform open to anybody, and I was accessing the panel. Anybody could make any proposal, and I was on the democracy platform that had several thousand proposals. There is
very little publicity.
Sorry?
I think it gets very little publicity.
Oh, of course, but it has no publicity at all.
Why not? Why?
Well, I would tell you that in the European Union, it doesn't have publicity either. Can you imagine that it's not just the politicians, it's the media that, depresses it, because none of the governments, to be honest, none of the politicians in the governments are interested in it. They don't want it. This is the citizens' initiative, and that's the citizens, and Macron was the only one that wanted to happen, and he was essentially alone.
He's quite influential, but I think that the whole scheme, which is incredibly impressive, has an enormous potential for improving the quality of decision making, whether it's political or whatever it is. But in the political arena, it's worthwhile looking at the areas where there is cross-party activity to try to develop good legislation. And there are those areas. Not all the areas in Parliament are really contentious from a legislation point of view. Just a couple of other very quick points on the general thing is obviously the quality of the questions and the nature of the questions is critically important. I think perhaps there is a very interesting development that could focus on how you could explore the trade-offs between the different factors. And I think there's a completely new area which has got to look at the costs and the benefits when you get the trade-offs, because it's not just statements. You've got to try to feed in what the costs and benefits are in some sort of financial terms.
No, that's a good point, isn't it? Especially say on the ULEZ, which has interesting financial dynamics. Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, it's like a baseline to attach to the political statements that can show the effect of those statement changes. One thought, Tony, very quickly, and then I'll shut up, was if Parliament, this could be used to make Parliament adopt it in order to do this thing that we all believe is necessary. Parliament is demonstrably delivering its manifesto and whatever else. If it's searching for strategic questions, whatever, but the participation from us, public, for seeing that happen could be a process. This AI consensual debating tries to say, well, look, you guys have got to get on with using things like this because we are able to tell you. And it goes one step further than those petitions, and or takes the positions, the petitions mission on, and delivers this sort of approach with those petitions. So I'm trying to say the groundswell of everybody being an instrument to hit those in decision-making positions, boardrooms, maybe, I don't know, but certainly politics, into action by they being told to do it and show what they do, and cost benefits would come into that as well. I don't know, as a means to push this water up the hill. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Point, and I'll shut up too. I think there's a massive industry out there around the whole concept of opinion polls.
Yeah.
What you're doing is in a way a more sophisticated version of a lot of what's going on at the moment. And I would wonder whether some of the Maori people or something like that would be really interested in working on this to try to get their work integrated into what you've been doing and moving further in a very, very sophisticated way.
Yes, just on that point, Bruce, Demos has used this police alone on several projects, but they are all at best at the regional basis or related to social issues like housing and so on, which is good as well.
Got to start somewhere.
The main problem, like for instance, YouGov, okay? YouGov is a good comparison, but YouGov is a polling system, right? You get your one vote and you vote once. You don't know how others have voted, and whether you would change, seeing that other people have voted differently than you, and there is a 70% of people voted different than you, and then you may ask yourself why I'm in the 30. And then you read the arguments of those who voted 30% and say, wow, this doesn't stick. Perhaps I should change my position. So YouGov, I think it's I'm not saying it's a deliberate, but this is a convenient way for politicians to use it when they want to. Now, regarding consensus AI or consensus debating, we shouldn't say, I'm not saying that all politicians are the same. For instance, I was once on the transport committee, but for the last few years, I've been at this AI committee, and you wouldn't believe what kind of quality debate there is. There is hardly any politics involved. Perhaps because the area is not immediately applicable and controversial, and that's why. But these people are genuinely interested in betterment of the country and applying AI in the best possible way. I'm not saying this is all rosy. No, I think this is timid in terms of what should be done. But it shows you that it is possible. In the grounder scheme, I would see it as a way out for the government to make difficult decisions. This is a straightforward application. Government can't get out in many areas. It's been cornered. It's cornered itself. And it can't come out because the predecessor said something and they stick to the predecessor's view because it's a party view. Now they may say, well, we want a conciliatory debate, and this is the whole parliament saying. So it's not us, Conservative of Labour Party, this is the parliament saying. And you've elected us, so here we are. This is a parliamentary decision. Yeah, this is it. You don't need a referendum, right? Suddenly. So I'm not sure how this will move with Lord Clement Jones, and I've also been talking to another Lord. I wouldn't mention his name, who is also supportive of that. But you would need many more MPs. If it goes through one committee, that would be a breakthrough.
Yeah, Tony. I mean, to be fair, listening and thinking, you are going for bullseye where you're headed with that committee and that principle, because you're trying to get in at the heart of the matter. On two subjects, I suppose, AI and its influence on all of us, and then AI as a tool to manage the sort of things you've been talking about today. This is all happening quite soon, isn't it? You're getting some momentum now.
Well, I'm so much focused on politics as a means to an end.
Yeah.
Regarding AI.
Yeah.
Because you can't sensibly control AI.
No.
Unless you sort out the politics and decision makers, and you need a global decision maker. Yeah, and that's why I'm interested in the European Union as a kind of a de facto world government. You can see what is happening with Ukraine. United Nations is essentially dead. Yeah, on such a substantive problem, right? It just says nothing. So this is the terrible state that we are in. And we can only hope that the existing organization, either NATO or United Nations, also European Union, converted in a kind of a quasi-federation, will take decision on behalf of the whole world as a de facto world government, not truly world government, but a decision-making body on perhaps majority of the well-meaning people.
Tony, can I interject with just a brief point here, because I'm listening, especially when you used ULEZ as an example, and you talked about your past participation in transportation committee and a lot of subjects which you just alluded to, basically in AI, are it's sort of esoteric right now still for a lot of people. And the question that I have, and this also gets to the issues within the EU, but start with Northern Ireland, for example. You know, why didn't the Roger Fisher was the guy who authored the concept of getting to yes, and he's a Harvard man back in the 1970s or 60s, and he developed that concept of getting to yes, and that's been very successful, as you pointed out, in South Africa, for example. But I think that when you go to an issue like Northern Ireland, and the questions are so existential, and they are my one critical comment about your approach, which is very, very interesting, is that it's ahistorical. In a sense, you try to, let's get out of history and let's look at the practical issues here. Well, the fact of the matter is, I think that there are a lot of historical tendencies that you run into, and for example, the case of Northern Ireland, for instance, the problem you run into is the whole past history of not the sort of, you go back to the issue of what you get back to the issue that the problem is you can't get to a situation where many of the people in Northern Ireland will not accept the fact of a majority vote being held by Catholics. It's okay as long as the Catholics are a minority, but now be a majority. Well, wait a second. Well, we can't have that, and so that's an issue, and it goes beyond Northern Ireland. And you look at lots of places in Europe where they have essentially failed to overcome. Now it's early days maybe, and it will happen. You know, you have the Walloons and the Flemish in Belgium, which is a quiet and civilized country, you might think, but there are episodes of violence there. There have been. You look at outside of the European Union, you have the whole question of Bosnia-Herzegovina. That hasn't been resolved yet, with the Europeans working on that very hard. And you can go several different other ethnic, Kosovo and Serbia, for example. And it's because there are these emotional attachments which are beyond or deeper than emotional attachments that are deeper than the practical issues that are on the surface. And just the last one, the whole issue, for example. I mean, we've been talking in Europe for at least 50 years that I can recall of Turkey as a candidate member, or Turkey as they now call it, as a candidate member of the EU. Well, they're not a member of they're never going to be a member of the EU, and the Turks have finally realized that. And why not? Why not? Because Europe is, because most Europeans are uncomfortable with. I use a neutral phrase if I can. Most of them are uncomfortable with the idea of a majority, a about bringing in 100 million Turks in the same continent. Yeah, we can bring in a few guys from, Bosnia maybe, or Albania, but Turks, no way. We're gonna let that happen. And so there are emotional issues there that go much deeper than I think you can address with these sort of mechanical questions like Fisher developed, for example, back in the 1960s in America. And by the way, and I speak as someone who has experience with this, and it's the American Civil War has never really ended. And we are finding it more and more difficult, not less and less difficult, to deal with, for example, racial and ethnic questions in the United States, because those questions are much deeper than you can resolve with these mechanical types of solutions, such as consensual democracy.
Yeah,
I think.
Well, thank you. This is a superb intervention and putting me firmly on the ground. Well, I would refer, Stephen, to your last statement when you use the word emotion, right? Because this is what drives us.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, put this in a different context. 3 days ago, there was a European Union conference in Ukraine, right, with Zelensky. And do you know what he said? He wanted Ukraine to be the member of the European Union by the end of the next year.
Yes.
Was he irrational or was he rational? In my view, he's absolutely rational. He knows what he is talking about, and Ukraine is the best example how history has changed. We may say whatever happened in the past. This is no reason that the past will be replicated in the future. It is not. And Ukraine is the best example of it. The same as Kosovo, America, and so on. Look from a very, very wide perspective. And I'm looking from the perspective of AI. Forget global warming and global disorder that we have. Yeah, we roughly have a decade, maybe less than a decade, when we lose control over AI. Initially, not knowingly being conscious of it. It will be pernicious and it will just seep in before we realize. But anyway, within a decade, we lose control of our future. So talking about how it was in the past and the differences, this is an absolutely secondary issue, although emotionally this is at the top. Either to survive, we have to admit this. That's what Ukraine says. You can't apply the rule that, say, Turkey took 60 years or Poland took 10 years and so on, or even Austria took 10 years. This is no longer applicable. Either you are very decisive 80-20 rule, that means you go on the rough edges, or you just disappear. The same is with Brexit. I mean, talking that we won't be with Europe within the next few years is rubbish. Absolutely we will be. We'll be crawling on our knees saying that we want to be there within a few years. Although emotions, they are entirely different.
Well, can I just?
I'm not talking about HS2 in 20 years' time, right?
Yeah.
Even more laughing stock.
Can I just give a brief positive rejoinder to that, which I think that I understand what you're. I understand those comments, and yeah, I'm worried about that too. And is AI for example, AI developing too fast for this time scale? And my positive rejoinder to you is that, and again, I could use the American example because it's well known, but Also, the European example. Europe basically, if you look at, for example, why does Belgium work? Why does Belgium work despite the, and the answer is that the Belgians have decided that they have to put aside their differences for the sake of being a member of a larger body, the EU. And in the same way, in America, you can be pro-life or freedom of choice on the abortion issue, but you have to put that aside for the greater good of being part of the same union, so that basically the larger group, there are advantages to being an American or to being a European, in the case of Belgium, for example, that the benefits that you get from being part of that greater body, and that's what Europe is trying to do now, is to create that greater body that will allow people to put aside the provincial or parochial differences. So, I mean, I think that's the dynamic that has to work. Whether it works fast enough or not, in the way that you have suggested, that's a good question. But I hope, well, I worked I worked in Brussels for quite a while. I worked with the Belgium, with the EU as an American, and so I hope it succeeds. But all I'm saying is that there are always these particularist emotional attachments that have very deep roots, and it's difficult. It's a difficult problem to overcome them, and I don't think you can do it. Well, I don't think you can do it by piecemeal approaches, saying, "Oh, well, we'll resolve ULEZ, or we'll resolve this issue or that issue, that minor issue," because you always still have to. People are going to always say, "Wait a second, what does this do about?" And Northern Ireland's a good example of this. What does this little concession mean over the longer term for our country as a whole? And I think that's what's happened, for example, in the case of Northern Ireland is a good example of that, because to get along, go along, that worked for a while in Northern Ireland, but now suddenly they're saying, wait a second, if you have a boundary in the North Sea, well, what does this mean about the bigger picture for Northern Ireland's role in the greater body of Ireland as a whole? And if we give the concession of a first minister being from the Catholic side, and that's the way it's interpreted, if we give that concession, does that undermine our whole role in the UK? I don't know, but that's
yeah, I agree with you, Stephen, wholeheartedly. On the other hand, I follow the principles of Maslow's pyramid of needs, which says that perhaps 95% of people are driven by two basic needs. It's the nourishment and survival. Therefore, most people won't change their mind unless They are being brought to the brink of the unsurvival or demise.
Mm.
And that's where the big decisions are going to be made. And that is my hope. And that's what Ukraine is saying. Yeah, why suddenly the European Union got its act together? Because it was so close to our borders. And people could now clearly see that another Munich is a disaster for the whole world. Thanks God that we had that film, Munich, which was screened 2 years ago, reminding us where it was leading to. Yeah, I'm talking about 1938, the Hitler,
Yes.
the Chamberlain Act. So that's what I think is most likely to happen. The problem is, will it happen on time or will it be just too late, which is still a possibility. And yeah, sorry, David.
My quick comment on Bruce. I agree with Bruce's idea of introducing option appraisal in these questions. That would be quite an intelligent input into the questioning. But can I go back to this, the central theme you were talking about in influencing government in the UK at the top level that you've indicated, and go to our lower level and my own experience in that. But there is a party called the Conservative Party, and they have within it a political forum set up, which is set up by, and have been around a long, long time, by central office. And what they initiate or have initiated is for every constituency, if they set up a group called a Conservative Policy Forum now, to address a series of questions periodically, and it could be every month or so. And the only one I went to recently was addressing what should we put into, or what should the Conservatives put into the 2024 manifesto. Okay, and there are 6 questions in that, which I won't go into. And there were about 8 people, maybe 10 people in the group. And I have to say, I probably disagreed with most of them as to what they wanted. I won't specify what it was. But the people there were, I would think, 60 to 70 years of age on the whole, with a SPAD who was much younger. And the chairman was probably late 60s. And the thing that I feel instinctively is that the way in which the meeting was conducted was pretty random. And the poor chairman had to summarize the views for all the questions at the end, and with a written statement, which he did. He did a pretty good job, I suppose, for the majority, but I have to say my own views weren't expressed at all in that. They just weren't reflected. Fine. But I did think that the application of what you're talking about would be absolutely brilliant if taken over a slightly longer period and it were properly facilitated. Now, the interesting thing is that 48% of the recommendations from the various constituencies, CPFs, were fed into their last manifesto. So they do have an influence. Half of the views from the general public, or shall we say the members anyway, were reflected. Now, the problem, of course, is how to do it. And the challenge, it's pretty taken off your screen view, which showed the opinion groups. But we'll probably bear in mind, when you went through, this is a technical point, you say that this is me, and if I vote on the statement in this way, the blob moves.
Yes.
Okay. And you responded again in different ways. And frankly, I did not understand, or it didn't register with me logically why it was moving in that way. It just didn't seem to bear any logical relationship. But obviously, it was working to an algorithm or a set of rules that made it operate in that way.
Can you see the screen right now?
Yeah.
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you. Now, that reminded me of and again, almost reflecting something that Bruce was, I think, implying, causal modeling was something I looked at for a while and love a lot in terms of getting into the many factors that can influence an issue. And you can go into huge detail. And in fact, one can get lost in the final presentation, but a particular thing called iModeler enables all the various links to be represented for various things you focus on with a matrix, which showed the influences in short, medium, and long term, not strong, very strong, and weak influences on what these various factors would be over time, etc. And that all looked very convincing. But when the influences were somewhat indirectly linked, but they were nevertheless linked, I worked out how it worked with a fairly simple relationships that was logically explained. And if you work at it mathematically, you can see how it operates. But when I came to the more complicated things, I asked the founder how it worked. He said, well, this is a secret, this is part of our secret methodology, and it's not public. And I didn't know. Mm. So then the question of trust comes in as to what's happening here. Mm. And I think when it comes to the presentation of how one could apply the system consensus AI, I thought that a way initially to do it would be to start from, and apparently it's really reflecting, I think, what Stephen was mentioning, almost starting at the end and saying, well, these are the outcomes of what you're going to get and how it operates, like this diagram here, and then working into a bit more as to how it actually operates. But with this particular diagram, you're stuck with the problem of, do I trust it?
Yeah. Can I answer?
So in the end, we're talking about a sort of credibility attached to it all. But basically, if one can get over that and present it properly and it's properly facilitated, I really would have thought that in parallel with the Lord Clement Jones's approach, think something through the Conservative Party in the way I've described might be appropriate somehow in the future as well.
Yeah. Very briefly, credibility, this is as open as it could be. I'm talking about police. It's an open source. Anybody can look at it, how the algorithms work. It's a most sophisticated statistics, I would say. But you have to take into account that Demos was using it. And if Demos was using it, on several projects, then I would say you can add some credibility at least to it.
Right.
But it is statistically correct and mathematically correct.
Okay.
Now regarding so that's regarding the trust. The next version of this consensual debating, which I hope will be sometime this year, will be using the far more sophisticated AI, which will be listening to the debate when it is live, like this one, right? It will be summarizing it and will be interjecting its own comments, right? So I don't know, perhaps in a few months' time, we'll have here one of the debaters will be the AI and you will speak as we are. And that will also cover the question of statistics and presenting in a different way. I cannot do it all on my own. And that's why I'm really, because it just happened, that I've got those skills, which I remembered for 50 years and I retained them, right? So I can, I can do it myself, but I simply haven't got the time. It's impossible. Right? And I'm talking at the university on Wednesday when I am a mentor, and I'm trying to get some support from the university, from Regent's University. Maybe that's the way, which would be very beneficial for the university and from our need as well. Regarding conservatives, David, if you want to talk on that, we can talk off screen if you like.
Yeah, we can have a look.
And I would be willing to help as much as I can. Listen, guys, we've been discussing this for 1 hour and 45 minutes. So we are doing quite well, but I think we have to close because you probably have got enough of it, unless you are desperate to continue. So I am open to suggestions. But I think we have covered a lot of ground, and I really thank you very much for your contributions. Now, this shows that perhaps such discussion debates do have place at Tempus, and from time to time we should have such Zoom sessions on other subjects as well. Notwithstanding that, I mentioned that we should meet in person by the end of this month. I've been suggesting 21st as February as one of the options. Not sure whether you have any views on that or on other days.
I couldn't do the 21st, definitely. I've got all sorts of things going on.
You can't. You can't.
No, I can't. I've got my diary in front of me, which is my Bible.
Can you do? Which day can you do?
It's like anything. Not that day is about the best I can say, and the day before is not so good either. But that's all I'd say. The rest is sort of more open.
Is there any day in February you can do it?
Well, I could do that Wednesday, Thursday.
Wednesday, 26th.
Possibly Friday, but Friday's always a funny day to go into town.
Yeah.
So
I'm marking it 22nd as a possibility.
It's okay for me. Yeah. One thing, Tony, a small point on your very trivial point. You know, you have ABC on your outputs. Why do you have ADU? Agree, disagree, undecided.
This is not from me. This is from Police.
Because it's generic.
ABC. That's their annotation.
Things like that for noddies like me, and I put myself forward very much as a technical noddy, and I need to be handheld through. And that, for example, I was saying, which is A, which is B. That sort of traffic light concept is really important.
Yeah.
Because the audiences are highly dynamic in all sorts of ways, but that consistency of simplicity and which builds trust. You said trust in the algorithms or the coding.
Yes.
There's got to be another level of trust for, I call them noddies, and there are a range of noddies. They can be completely disenfranchised by their own mistake on a computer. And I'm talking very simply here. Yeah. Obviously, you get over that. But if you've got to entangle yourself in something that doesn't just come up with the goods, you lose the audience. Yeah. Especially as as David was saying, facilitation and everything else will make this really, you're in the right place to go for it. You just need not to trip up, because it's like anything, one step forward, 3 steps back, isn't it, in these things?
Yeah, I didn't want to go into the nitty-gritty because that's a different level, if you like.
Yeah.
I could have, but it would have extended our discussion more profoundly.
But I think the principle of simplicity.
Yeah.
And as David said, start at the end and work back as the user complexity might be as much as anything, and rather than have a whole canopy of aspects that define how right it is, it's just a sort of ABC process is the place probably to start.
There's always scope for improvement, and I'm sure that the next version will be far more user-friendly, if you like.
Yeah, it'll be permanently on change.
And that's what the AI will enable. Yeah. Imagine that any one of you can ask a question like you're asking me, you'll be asking it.
And it'll say, I can fix it.
And it's already possible. I don't have this version, but there are versions like Chinchilla or Lambda coming probably this month. You know Lambda? Lambda was is probably even more sophisticated than ChatGPT. And the guy that was the chief designer, scientist, Blake Lemoine, he thought that it was conscious. And he wrote an article about that. And there was, for 2 months, there was such a shock in the press and in the eye and so on. Even last week, they were still debating this. I thought it wasn't conscious. But anyway, it shows you the level of sophistication. And what Google did, they did not release it into the public. They actually sacked him, right? And the very fact that they sacked him tells you how, in quotes, scary they were to get it out into the open. Now, they have been forced by OpenAI to do precisely that, because it's a commercial interest. So they decided on Wednesday there will be an announcement from Google about that, and they almost certainly release it. And this will have almost certainly the capability to do graphs, video, slideshows, photos, all the media, right? Interaction. And this could be this month. And if ChatGPT has created such a stir-up, and suddenly people are talking about AI, even average people. So think about this. And this will be coming this month, or say next month, right? And even more important, which is Chinchilla, which is probably hundreds of times faster and most sophisticated in the next 6 months. So they wanted to screen it off from the public because it is so dangerous. It's not so grandiose and beautiful, but it's also dangerous. This ChatGPT has written instruction for the thieves how to rob a house, right? And it's in the public domain. You can now read it. So this is not such a devious thing. It is devious, but it's overall in worldwide it's not that devious. But on the same principle, it can teach somebody how to get access to the nuclear bomb arsenal, right? Various things. You just put your imagination into big overdrive, and then you got the solution. So that's
how about solving the Irish problem?
I'm sure
Yeah.
you can even ask now, and I ask such problems, but it doesn't speculate. It is being trained not to offer predictions into the future, purposely. Right? So people are now, since this code, OpenAI released the code, this is important, to the general public. You can have access to the code. This is the whole point. If you know it, and it's complex and so on. But you can then manipulate it, and some private companies already do that, right? They add vision to it. Yes. You can have a microphone, but it doesn't speak. It doesn't speak, first of all, because it would have spoken too fast. You wouldn't have understood it. Or it would give you only 2-3 sentences. Whereas now it can produce long sheets of information within half a minute. So that's the difference. So I'm talking about the pluses and minuses, benefits and potential disasters that this thing. But you see, the commercialism is overpowering all the other issues. Google doesn't want to be derailed because Microsoft is preparing the merger of ChatGPT into Bing and probably Edge. So instead of browsing, you'll have this, right? Like on Google, you go there and you have a normal chat. You no longer use a keyboard, you just converse. And this is going to be within the next few months. You can imagine how the world would change just in a few months. And now think about 7 years, I said the end of the decade. This is ridiculous that even AI people I give you an example. A very good friend of mine, he's much better known than me in our circles. We've been talking about those deadlines, and I said about 2030, and I'm writing now a book complete by the end of this month on the subject, 2030. And he said, no, Tony, it won't be 2030. And what? After 3 months, 3 weeks after GPT-3, ChatGPT appeared, he wrote an article that singularity will be in 2035. Singularity, not just what I was talking about, 2030, losing control. Within 3 weeks, he changed his mind. Right? This is the state of AI in such a big flux. So when I'm saying, in a decade, I really mean it. I almost feel it, and I'm more concerned than exhilarated. That's the because I think this is a responsible approach to it.
Yeah, when you said imagine the things you were suggesting, imagine. No, I can't imagine it. Not because I know the strengths and the weaknesses or the fears or but I literally can't imagine it. So that's quite interestingly challenging because it's a complete black hole for me in terms of what will it mean, given I believe in things that don't seem to be coming true.
Yeah. To help you, just before we part, just one sentence. Don't think about AI, artificial intelligence, as a technology. This is a new type of intelligence. And if you look at that from that vantage point, suddenly new understanding comes into force.